lines of these committees would have been in 2004-5. So in the same year, the line has been raised. And when you compare it to what the World Bank uses, the $25, in fact, actually the Indian line is not that much below. It's $17 when you compare it, when you put in the same metric. So, so it's not that India is using a line that is ridiculously low compared to what is globally used as destitution, right? But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a higher line. That I think there has to be some normative content in that. But stepping aside, moving on from what the line should be, what this graph shows you is that I've just used the data and said, well, what if we had a line that was half the official poverty line or twice the official poverty line? And the comparison of the three lines for both rural and urban just shows you that regardless of the line, you would see a big increase in the pace of poverty decline between in the 2004-9 period versus 2009-11 period. There's a big increase. 2004-9, the pace is also faster than 93 to 2004. So it's not a construct of where the line itself is. I mean, there's something real is changing. So what is changing? What led to? Okay, so if we say that something has changed, is it growth or is it redistribution? And a nice summary in the popular press about that debate is the Bhagwati Sen. I mean, it could be perhaps a one-sided debate. Not both are debating, but there is, at least the media is debating their debate. And it falls under just to caricature it, is growth versus redistribution. I don't think either one is actually saying that exactly, but I'm just, if you had to put them in one versus the other, you could say, well, growth versus redistribution. Well, let's look at growth. Growth is indeed picked up. The pace India has steadily, since in the 80s you had a hint of higher growth, 90s, 2000s, well now we have that period in which the pace has declined. This graph was made before the most recent numbers, so it shows you that this is a recycled presentation. If I had updated it, it would have taken us even further down with the economy slowing down. But so growth has picked up. And so those who believe in growth as the channels there is evidence for that. Growth is paying handsome dividends, right? So you have the growth that you see in the national accounts, in GDP per capita growth is picking up. You also see it in how much household level consumption has changed. So the left-hand side graph is the annual increase in consumption based on the household survey. So the pace has picked up on average, but also it's more inclusive in the sense that the elasticity of poverty reduction with respect to growth is also increasing, has also been increasing, which just means that for 1%, so for example, if the elasticity is -1, it means that for every 1 percentage point increase in growth, you have a 1 percentage point decline in poverty. And obviously the higher that number in absolute terms, but obviously it's negative, the higher the elasticity and more the growth has been even more effective than at reducing poverty. So the elasticities have picked up, but then again there's, as with everything else in India, there's a huge dispersion. So some states have done much better than others in converting growth, everything in quotes, because I'm not, I'm telling you what the debate is. I'm not showing you anything that gives you causality, but it would line up with a story in which growth was leading to faster poverty reduction and being much more effective in some states than others. And you can all look at your favorite state and see where it lies in this dispersion. Okay, so that's the growth side. There are others who say, in fact, actually, it's not really growth. It's the government has massively scaled up transfer programs, and that's what's leading to these great outcomes in terms of a decline in poverty. And indeed, when you look at the scale of these programs, For example, I've just shown you the public distribution system. There's a very nice paper that looks at a number of these, also the midday meal scheme. What you find is the households, this shows you just in rural areas the percentage of households who were purchasing PDS food. I think this is only cereals. I'm not sure whether it's cereals and sugar. I think it might only be cereals. And what you see is between 93, 94 and 2004-5, the offtake declined. And that was when India shifted in 1997 from a universal PDS to a targeted PDS system. So in some ways you should have expected that. There would have been, if you're in design reducing coverage, you should see a decrease in the percentage of households consuming from the PDS. But after that, even though in theory it's still a targeted PDS, there has been quite a significant increase in the percentage of households that are consuming, that are benefiting from the PDS, and this is coming largely from state efforts. So this is very, very concentrated in some states. So Chhattisgarh, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, Himachal are I think the main ones that have really expanded, but largely through state resources. But what is the outcome of that expansion and additional expenditure on in-kind transfers? This paper by Himanshu and Sen, they do a pretty careful analysis, and they suggest that 1/3 of the poverty decline actually should be attributed to the scale up of these programs. Of course, you know that this is a very charged debate, because all of this research is being done when the Food Security Act was being debated, and so it's important to study carefully whether or not our efforts in this direction have had impact, in order to also think about what you might do for them to be equally or more effective in future, or whether you have some other kind of program like cash transfers. So there's been a lot of debate on these issues, but this evidence seems to suggest that in-kind transfers have had handsome payoffs. But there are, if I play devil's advocate on the PDS story, if you actually look at the size of the transfers, they're tiny. When you actually convert it, the amount that households are being given in rupee terms, it's very small. So then the question is, well, how can it have such a big impact? And I want to show you this graph just to show that we're poised at a time in our current configuration, our current consumption patterns, that very small differences, very small transfers can have big impacts, and that's largely because we have a very, very, very large percentage of our population that lives right around that poverty line. So small differences. So if I change the poverty line from 26 rupees to 25 or 24 or up a little bit, those numbers are going to shift a lot. So even small differences will have big impacts on poverty. It's a separate question of how much do people's lives really change. It at least bumps you over that line, and it's important to have a yardstick against which you measure yourself over time. But the point is that even small changes right now will lead to big impacts, whether it comes from growth or transfers. But the flip side of that is equally true, which is that small shocks will also have big impacts on the negative side. And in fact, if you look at what I've shown you here is the distribution of the population below the poverty line, between what I've just called it vulnerable. These are in the red are people who are between 1 and 2 poverty lines. So people who are between 26 and 52 rupees. Is that 52? Yes, 52 rupees. And so there's a huge percentage of the population in 2011-12 in rural areas, 58% that are just between 1 and 2 poverty lines. So we've done a good job in terms of people are reducing the percentage of poor, but not to points, not to the space in which you can declare victory. You're still looking at a situation in which people are quite precariously close to the poverty line. So that I gave you the growth versus redistribution story, but coming back to the growth story, growth skeptics have argued that it's unlikely that growth would have led to poverty reduction because there's been no employment creation. So there's the same data will also suggest that that in absolute numbers there's been a collapse in job creation. The yellow line is an estimate of how many you need to keep pace with population growth. About 8 million a year new jobs should be created. What actually happened between 2004 and 9, you can see, it's less than 1 million, and it does pick up in 2009 to 11, but nowhere near what is needed. So the concern is that, how can growth possibly be reducing it if people aren't getting jobs? What would be the channel? Of course, one channel is that it generates resources in order to pump in through redistributed transfers, but that cannot be a sustainable strategy over the long term. So what is happening on the employment side? I think one of the really worrying things to my mind, but I have had various people tell me that why is that worrying, is that women are dropping out of the labor force. And India already has it's sort of a uniquely Indian and I think Nepali pattern. You don't see it in many places around the world that women, as they get more educated, they start dropping out of the labor force, but that is the case. That is the case here. But even at the already low rates of female labor force participation, we find that after 2005 in rural areas, not so much in urban, the labor force participation of women has declined. And the hope was that 2009-10 was just an outlier of some sort, but in 2011-12 you still find that it stays around where the 2009-10 numbers were. So this for example is one area in which I'm very interested to hear what people have to say. You guys interact much more on the private sector side. Is it a case of there's not enough good jobs for women? Are they dropping out of the labor force because the demand side is collapsing? Is it an income effect that actually spouses are doing much better, incomes are rising, so an income effect would increase the propensity for somebody to opt for leisure? So are we just seeing that? Is it that women are more likely to be in school and spending longer years, more years studying? You see a bit of that. You see that indeed the percentage of women who are studying has gone up, but it can't be all of the story, because you can see immediately that even if you net that out, you'll see a big drop. So this is, I think this is an issue in which we really don't know which way cause and effect is flowing. So that's the negative side of the labor market stories. There's not that many jobs. Women are much less likely to work. But there's also a positive side, in quotes, because I picked up from one of the op-eds in which when the same data that shows you these things also shows you that finally less than 50% of India's labor force is working in agriculture. And that is, it's with a sigh of relief, because not because you don't want people to be working in agriculture, but because productivity levels have fallen very dramatically as the value added from agriculture has been going down much faster than the movement of people out of agriculture into non-farm activities, either in rural areas or into urban areas. So there's many people locked into agriculture, and there are especially among women, especially women are much more likely to be working in agriculture, working for very low incomes. And the process of structural transformation, or which is essentially the allocation of people out of agriculture to non-farm activities, has been quite slow. But in 2011-12 we reached, to the extent that 50% is a useful marker, we reached that point. So at least 50%, 48% or something like this worked in agriculture. A different way of, so I'm representing the same data in a different way just to help you see it, what I'm showing you in these graphs is for both rural and urban areas where the net increase in job creation is coming from. And you see it's coming in construction. So that's been the source of net job creation in rural areas. It's coming in Transport, storage and communications, that's the purple line. There's a decline in trade, hotels and restaurants in rural areas. Manufacturing has picked up. I'm sure many of you are aware of the debates about India's growth process and whether India can really do it so differently from the East Asian countries without growth in labor intensive manufacturing. But you do see some pickup in manufacturing.